Stephen Hughes, performing his security duties, watched the monitor intently. The screen showed the servants' room, where an open suitcase filled with $1 million in cash stood. It was his cold-blooded and unprincipled experiment. Next to him was the housekeeper, Mrs. Davis. "Do you really think this is necessary, sir, considering the enormous amount of money involved?" she asked. "That's exactly what I want, Davis," Steve said coldly. "I want to see what choice she makes. If she takes even one wad, I'll understand her true nature. If she takes everything, then I'm dealing with a shrewd predator." The door on the screen swung open, and a weary Amelia entered the room. At first, she didn't see the suitcase, but when she came closer, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Her face changed from shock to bewilderment and fear when she realized it was a trap, a carefully planned test. She fell to her knees before this devilish temptation. One wad of cash promised to solve all her problems, her debts and worries about her child's future. Images flashed through her mind, a cozy crib for her baby, and a carefree life free from fear. Steve watched her pitiful state with a smirk. Amelia pulled her hand away as if it had been burned and remembered her mother's words. "Never sell your conscience." Humiliation weighed heavily on her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but not from despair, but from the fact that her inner dignity had been measured in dollars. Suddenly, anger flared up inside Amelia, filling her with new strength. She quickly wiped away her tears, her gaze instantly hardening. Then, decisively and loudly, she slammed the lid of the suitcase shut. Mrs. Davis's voice was clearly panicked. "What is she doing?" "She's coming this way," Steve said in surprise, turning off the monitor and adding, "Let me be alone." The few minutes that seemed like an eternity to him flew by, and then there was a soft but persistent knock on the heavy door of his office. "Come in," he said, trying to hide his excitement. Soon the office door swung open and Amelia entered, struggling to drag a heavy suitcase behind her. With a thud, she placed it on the Persian rug. Her breathing was ragged, her face pale, but her eyes, shining with tears, burned with righteous anger. "I believe this is yours, Mr. Hughes," she said, her voice trembling but ringing with confidence. She took a step forward, her delicate figure radiating surprising power. "I found this in my room. You must have dropped it during your security check." She said the last words with a caustic irony that was sharper than any blade. "I didn't check, but I hope nothing is missing. I don't want to be suspected of stealing a couple of wads from your forgotten million. Take it now, and keep in mind that my poverty is only temporary, and not a reflection of my true self, which will never be for sale." A year ago, when Amelia entered this estate, she felt like Alice in Wonderland. Her existence before that had been a gray, monotonous routine, a tiny, always dimly lit apartment on the outskirts, saturated with dampness and hopelessness. The days dragged on in an endless series of shifts at a roadside diner, where she worked as a waitress, returning home late at night with tired legs and the smell of fried onions lingering in her hair. Every ruble she earned went to pay the bills and buy medicine for her mother, whose strength was fading day by day. Dreams had long since become a foreign concept to her. The future loomed before her as an endless string of gray days. After her mother's death, she was left alone, immersed in grief and the weight of the debts that had accumulated during her illness. A vacancy for a maid at the estate of Stephen Hughes, whom she had only occasionally heard of in the society columns, seemed to her not just an opportunity to earn money, but a salvation, a last chance for change. Not believing in a positive outcome, she nevertheless went to the interview, wearing her only decent blouse. Amelia met Mrs. Davis, and that first conversation left an indelible impression on her for the rest of her life. The senior housekeeper, with her impeccably straight back and eyes that revealed an icy calm, seemed to pierce her, assessing every detail. "You understand that working in Mr. Hughes's house is not ordinary cleaning," she said in a hoarse, emotionless voice. "It is service, self-sacrifice, complete devotion to the interests of your employer. We are the invisible spring that ensures his comfort. You will be required to perform your duties flawlessly, to remain silent, and to be completely loyal. Are you prepared for this, Miss White?" "Yes, ma'am," Amelia replied eagerly, as if she were taking a school exam. "I am very hardworking. I am not afraid of any work, and I just need this stability in my life." She got the job and was the perfect maid for a whole year, quiet, obedient, almost invisible. She learned to move silently, to anticipate her employer's every wish down to the smallest detail, and never to express her thoughts in words. But a few months ago, her carefully crafted life fell apart. She found out she was pregnant. Mark, a simple, cheerful guy she had been dating for about a year, was initially overjoyed. "We're going to have a baby, Amy. Our little one," he exclaimed enthusiastically, gently spinning her around in their small rented room. "I'll find a better job. We'll move into a bigger apartment. Everything will be fine, you'll see." Amelia trusted him, but his happiness soon turned to panic when he suddenly realized the full weight of responsibility that had fallen on his shoulders. One fine day, he simply didn't come home. His phone was unavailable, and his few friends could only shrug their shoulders. He had vanished into thin air, leaving her alone, heartbroken, and with an empty space where their life together should have been. Hiding a pregnancy in a house where your every move was noticed was impossible. Mrs. Davis was undoubtedly the first to guess. She didn't say anything directly, but her gaze took on an even more distant and contemptuous tone. She began to find fault with Amelia, giving her the hardest jobs, as if trying to drive her out. The climax came in the laundry room, amid the smell of washing powder and hot steam. "Your position is becoming too clear, Amelia," the housekeeper began, blocking her way. "You are damaging the reputation of this house. Do you understand what a desperate situation you are putting Mr. Hughes in?" "This is personal, Mrs. Davis," Amelia tried to object. "There is no personal life for servants in this house," declared the housekeeper. "Only the reputation of the master matters here, and you are destroying it. Rumors are already circulating. Who is the child's father? Perhaps one of the drivers. Or maybe you have something more ambitious in mind? Have you decided to secure your child's future at Mr. Hughes's expense?" "How could you?" Amelia exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with shame and anger. "I dare because I'm responsible for order in this house," Mrs. Davis hissed. "And rest assured I will inform Mr. Hughes of everything. He does not tolerate such surprises." She reported to him. That evening she stood in his spacious office, where even the air seemed to vibrate with power and wealth. Steve leaned back in his chair and listened to her, his expression remaining impassive. He was a man accustomed to treachery and betrayal. His business, built on the ability to calculate human weaknesses and exploit them, had taught him not to believe in the naivety of human feelings. "She's silent, sir," Mrs. Davis said softly, choosing her words with particular care. "She flatly refuses to name the father. Her behavior is provocative. Considering her poverty, an orphan with no means, I wouldn't rule out that this is a calculated tactic. She's waiting for the right moment to claim that you are the child's father. Think of the repercussions this would have. For you, for your company, for society as a whole. The press won't let this story go away." Steve was silent, but the housekeeper's words penetrated his heart, where a cynical seed of doubt was already growing. The thought that this quiet and inconspicuous girl could be hiding a calculating schemer was unpleasant to him, but it seemed entirely plausible. He knew how easily destinies and reputations could be destroyed by such intrigues. He couldn't allow everything he had built over decades to be destroyed. "What do you suggest, Davis?" he finally asked. "She should be fired immediately, give her a modest severance package, and make her sign a non-disclosure agreement," the housekeeper said without a shadow of a doubt. Steve shook his head. "No, that's too easy a solution. If she's really a schemer, she won't stop at small things. She'll definitely go to the press. No, we have to do something else. We need to find out the truth about her true nature. Before making a final decision, I want to be absolutely sure who I'm dealing with." A plan formed in his mind, simple and clear as a hammer blow. It was harsh, but in his opinion, flawless. He decided to test her, to tempt her with something he was sure no one could resist. He went to the bank and withdrew $1 million in cash. He installed a small camera in her room, wanting to be the only witness to the event, an event whose outcome he was convinced was a foregone conclusion. Amelia stood in the center of her tiny, unattractive room. Her whole world shrunk to the size of a black suitcase standing on a chair. Money, an unimaginable, fantastic, almost unbelievable wealth, more than she could ever have imagined or experienced. The first thought that broke through the shock was surprisingly simple. It was a mistake. Someone had mixed up the addresses. But that thought, barely formed, immediately faded away. No one could have entered her room in the service wing, where outsiders were strictly forbidden, by mistake. Then what was it? Someone's cruel joke? Or a trap? A cold, clammy wave of fear and humiliation began to rise from the depths of her soul. She was being tested, like a rat in a maze with a piece of cheese in front of it. Slowly, as if in a dream, she knelt down in front of the suitcase. The air in the room became thick and difficult to breathe. Her fingers, rough from endless work with water and chemicals, trembled as she reached out and touched the tight, crisp wad of bills. One wad, $10,000. Images flashed through her mind one after another. Here she was, paying off the last of her mother's medical bills, and feeling a weight lift off her shoulders that had been crushing her for over a year. She would walk into a bright, clean, if modest, rented apartment that still smelled of fresh paint. In a children's store, she looked at tiny rompers, socks, and an elegant canopy bed, ignoring the prices. She would no longer have to get up at 5 in the morning, carry the weight of a 12-hour workday, and then fall into a dead sleep, only to repeat it all the next day. She could just walk away, take her suitcase, and disappear. Start life with a clean slate. Isn't the most important thing that a child never knows want? Isn't motherhood more important than anything else? In the observation room, Steve looked at Mrs. Davis, who was standing next to him, completely focused on him, with a cynical smirk. "There you go, I told you so. Classic," he said quietly. "The struggle between conscience and temptation. Right now, she's probably going to look around to make sure no one is watching her, and then she'll start discreetly hiding the money. 2 minutes, no more. A completely pathetic and predictable act." But Amelia couldn't take her eyes off the money. It seemed disgusting to her, as if it were stained with dirt. Suddenly, she realized that if she took even one bill, she would lose something much more valuable forever. She would lose her identity. She would become what they wanted her to be, corrupt, weak, predictable. And at that thought, tears rolled down her cheeks. Hot, angry tears of resentment and humiliation. She wasn't crying because of her poverty, but because someone had dared to put her dignity on a par with $1 million. This suitcase was not her salvation, but the cruelest blow she had ever experienced. Memories of her mother's last days came flooding back. Tired and exhausted by illness, she took Amelia's hand and said in a quiet but firm voice, "Amelia, remember, in life everything can be taken away from you. Health, wealth, youth. But there are 2 things that no one can steal from you unless you betray them yourself. These are your name and your clear conscience. Do not devalue them under any circumstances." The memory burned her, giving her unprecedented strength. She frantically wiped away her tears, her gaze clearing and becoming firm and clear. Rising from her knees, she shook off the last traces of fear and doubt. Now there was only cold, crystal-clear anger in her heart. Without taking a single dollar, she slammed the lid of the suitcase shut with force, the sound loud and clear. It was incredibly heavy, like a coffin containing her buried dreams. But, gathering all her strength, she managed to lift it. Under the weight of his humiliation, she staggered out of the room and headed down the long corridor of the service wing toward the main house. She knew the name of the man responsible for this spectacle, and she was determined to return his most prized artifact to him. Steve and Mrs. Davis watched with genuine amazement as Amelia's figure, bent under the weight of the suitcase, left the room. The housekeeper's voice was filled with panic and despair. What is she doing? Where is she taking him? She was obviously hoping for a different outcome. She's coming here, Steve said slowly, his words betraying a genuine, unfeigned surprise that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Grabbing the monitors, he turned them off abruptly. Go, Davis. Now, leave me alone. I'll deal with this myself. He sat down at his desk, trying to collect his thoughts. All his calculations, all his skeptical faith in humanity had collapsed. He had been wrong. He had underestimated her strength. A few minutes later, which seemed like an eternity to him, there was a soft but persistent knock on the heavy door of his office. Come in, he croaked, his voice sounding strange, uncharacteristically hoarse. The door swung open, and Amelia appeared on the threshold. With some difficulty, she dragged the suitcase into the office and slammed it down on the Persian rug. Her breathing was ragged, her face pale, but her eyes, filled with tears, burned with righteous anger. "I believe this is yours, Mr. Hughes," she said, her voice trembling but sounding proud and confident. "You seem to have left it in my room." Stephen Hughes, sitting at a table worth more than the annual budget of a small town, felt completely helpless for the first time in his life. He had always been able to control any situation, to foresee every move as in a complex chess game, but the girl who now stood before him had disrupted all his calculations. She wasn't playing by his rules, but had created her own, incomprehensible to him. He looked at her, tears on her cheeks, anger in her eyes, her breathing ragged after dragging that damn suitcase across the entire estate, and saw no hint of threat or scheming. He saw something in her that he hadn't seen in a long time, unshakable human pride. Beneath the layer of cynicism and skepticism, something stirred inside him, something unpleasant, almost forgotten, a feeling of shame. "Sit down, Amelia," he said, his voice unexpectedly quieter than usual. He pointed to one of the exquisite leather armchairs intended for business partners and supplicants. "I will not sit here without an answer," she said firmly, her voice still vibrating but now sounding confident. "I want to know why you did this. Was it some kind of mockery, or did you really think I would accept this money?" Her composure, held in check for so long and so stubbornly, collapsed. Words poured out, bitter and searing. "Do you understand what I've been through? I come to my room, the only refuge in this huge house where I can be free, and I see this. Temptation, insult. Do you think that my poverty, my loneliness, and my pregnancy make me defenseless? That my conscience can be bought for $1 million? Is that what you think my dignity is worth?" She took a determined step toward his desk, her eyes no longer filled with fear, only rage. "You don't understand, Mr. Hughes. You have no idea what it means to work since the age of 15, to support a sick mother. You don't know how hard it is to bury your only family member and be left with debts that weigh heavily on your soul. You don't know what it means to trust someone and then be betrayed. I have only one thing left, my honor, what my mother taught me. And you're trying to disgrace it with your dirty money." Steve remained silent, giving her a chance to speak. Each of her words hit him like a blow. He tried to regain his composure and put on his usual mask of impartial pragmatism. "It was just a precaution," he finally said, trying to make his words sound firm and confident. "Standard security procedure. In my position, I can't trust people unconditionally, especially those who are so close to me." Even to him, these words sounded false and pathetic. Amelia laughed bitterly. "Security check? You offer your employees suitcases full of money to test them, and then what? Will you put jewels in their pockets to make sure they don't steal them? This isn't about security, Mr. Hughes. It's just unhealthy suspicion. And it's just humiliating." She uttered the word despicable in a barely audible voice, but it struck him deeper than any loud cry. He was used to labels like tough, ruthless, and business shark, but despicable was a word he had never heard used to describe him. "I can't work here anymore," Amelia said calmly but firmly. "I can't work for someone who doesn't respect me, who thinks I'm a potential criminal. I'm leaving. Immediately." She turned to leave, and at that moment, Steve realized he couldn't let her go. The feeling was irrational, illogical, contrary to all his beliefs. But the idea that this girl was about to leave his life seemed completely unbearable to him. She was the only person in recent memory who had spoken to him honestly and openly, the only one who had been sincere and different from everyone else. "Wait," he blurted out before he could think about what he was saying. Amelia stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "Well, what else? Do you want to check that I didn't take anything with me when I left? Maybe look to see if I hid a couple of packs for the road?" "Sit down," he repeated, and his words sounded unexpected to him. A request. There was no command in them, only a gentle invitation. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned and headed for the chair. Once there, she sat down on the edge, keeping her back straight and tense, as if ready to jump up at any moment. Steve rose from the desk that always served as a barrier between him and the rest of the world, and walked over to the bar. He poured 2 glasses of water, placing one on the table in front of her and keeping the other for himself. Instead of returning to his comfortable chair, he sat down in a similar chair across from her, thus reducing the distance between them. "You're right," he admitted, not looking at her but staring off to the side. It was mean, humiliating, and undoubtedly unjustifiable. The admission came out with great effort. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Stephen Hughes never forgave mistakes, but this was as sincere as he could be. "I'm used to assuming the worst of people," he continued, as if talking to himself out loud. "This world, a world where money plays the leading role, teaches you that. In it, everyone is looking for an advantage, everyone is ready to betray. I built walls around myself to protect myself, and I began to see enemies in everyone who showed me too much affection." Finally, he stared at her. "Mrs. Davis told me about your situation, about how you don't want to reveal the name of the child's father. In my circle, that's a red flag. It's a sign of an attack, blackmail, a lawsuit. And you believed her instead of me," Amelia said desperately. "You didn't bother to discuss it with me. You immediately decided I was guilty, and you staged this show to prove your point." "Yes," he replied briefly. "I was wrong. I saw what I wanted to see, not what was really there. You exceeded my expectations. You turned out to be much stronger." He paused, choosing his words carefully. What should he do now? Just let her go? That seemed like the simplest solution, but at the same time the wrong one. "I understand that you want to leave," he said, "and you have every right to do so. I will offer you compensation that will allow you to never work again. Consider it payment for my mistake." Amelia shook her head. "I don't want your money, Mr. Hughes, as I've already told you. It's not about the money. The fact is, I can't accept a penny from a man who has treated me this way, humiliating me." Her refusal cornered him again. She was incredible, sitting there in front of him, pregnant, penniless, abandoned by the father of her child, yet refusing money that could save her from all her troubles. Her pride was worth more than anything else to her. "So, what do you want?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "I want to leave," she said simply, "to gather my things and disappear, to start a new life where there are no prying eyes and no judgment." "I want to leave," she said simply, "pack my things and disappear, start a new life where there are no prying eyes and no judgment." "Stay," he said, and there was an unexpected determination in his voice. Suddenly, he realized that this was the only right thing to do. "Don't leave, not as a maid. I don't know how to explain it. Together, we'll find a solution. I want to make up for the pain I've caused you, not with money, but in another way. Let me help you sincerely, not as a master to a servant, but as an equal. I'll provide you and your child with the best medical care. You'll live here in the main house, in comfort and without having to work. You can have your baby in peace, and then we'll figure out what to do next. Maybe you'll want to continue your studies, whatever you want." Amelia stared at him intently, trying to figure out if he was setting another trap. His face was tense, his eyes showing a mixture of guilt, respect, and curiosity, as if he himself was as shocked by his proposal as she was. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "What for?" Steve was silent for a long time, staring at his hands. "Because," he finally said, "you reminded me today of a forgotten lesson, that not everything in life can be bought and sold, and I want to have at least one person around who will always remember that." After his words, a thick, heavy silence hung in the office. Steve's proposal, absurd and unbelievable, seemed to hang in the air. Amelia stared at him intently, trying to figure out if this unexpected gesture was hiding another trap, even more cunning than the previous ones. But his gaze was honest and open, devoid of his usual authoritativeness, reflecting only fatigue and something resembling sincere confusion. It seemed that Steve himself was not fully aware of what he had just said. "You want me to stay, like a monument, a reminder of something?" she said slowly, feeling the strange taste of the thought on her tongue. "Like a rare exhibit in your collection of cynicism? The girl you couldn't get. Will you show me off to your business partners?" Her words were laced with sarcasm, but Steve didn't take it personally. She even allowed herself a barely perceptible, crooked smile. "Perhaps, in my world, such things are rare, worthy of a museum," he said. But I'm serious, Amelia. I don't know how else to say it. I did something terrible and I want to make it right. Not because I'm afraid of the press. After today's conversation, I'm sure you won't go down that route. But because it's the right thing to do. Let it be my selfish desire to restore my moral integrity. She was silent for a long time, thinking about his words. Leave? Where? To a cramped room, endless work 12 hours a day, constant fear for the future. She was pregnant and alone. Her pride told her to get up and leave without looking back. But common sense and concern for the future of her child told her that this offer, however strange its conditions might seem, was an opportunity. An opportunity to give her baby what she herself had never had. Stability, comfort, access to quality medical care. All right, she finally said, and the word came out with great effort. It was as if she had overcome an invisible barrier. I'll stay, but only on my terms. Steve frowned in surprise. Conditions. He, Stephen Hughes, was being offered conditions. But he nodded calmly and said, I'm listening. First of all, I'm not your guest or a showpiece. I'll pay for my accommodation. I don't have money to just give away, but I can work. Not as a servant, of course. I can help in the garden, in the library, with the correspondence. I'm not going to be a burden. Amelia, that's ridiculous, he began. That's my main condition, she said firmly. Accept it or I'll leave right now. He looked at her silently for a few seconds before nodding. All right. The library, it's a real mess. My mother collected books for decades but never bothered to organize them. This will be perfect for you. Flexible hours and weekends off. Second, she added, feeling a surge of confidence, no money, no compensation, benefits, or other payments. You pay all medical expenses and everything related to the child. I'll agree to that, as it doesn't affect me personally, but I won't take a penny more than the agreed amount for my work at the library. Agreed, replied Steve, feeling the situation slipping inexorably out of his control, which, to his surprise, made her strangely attractive. And finally, she took a deep breath, there will be no more checks, no hidden cameras, no traps. You will communicate with me openly. If you have any doubts or suspicions, you will ask me directly. I promise to always be honest with you. I expect the same from you, respect, not as a subordinate but as a human being. When she finished, she looked him in the eyes, expecting ridicule and a gesture toward the door. But Steve didn't laugh. In his eyes, she saw a new, previously unfamiliar emotion, admiration. Agreed, on all your terms, he replied. Welcome to my home, Amelia. This time, it will be genuine hospitality. That same day, Steve invited Mrs. Davis into his office. The housekeeper entered, suspicion written all over her face, clearly expecting her mistress to be dismissed in disgrace. Steve, keeping his tone even, ordered, Davis, move Amelia White to the guest bedroom in the east wing, overlooking the garden. Mrs. Davis froze, her face contorted. I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand. You heard me correctly, he said sharply. As of today, Miss White will no longer be working as a maid. She will be cataloging my library, dining with you at the same table, and you will address her as Miss Amelia? Is that clear? But, sir, after everything we've learned, whispered the housekeeper, unable to believe what she was hearing. I've learned that she is the most honest person in this house. Steve interrupted coldly, and I will not tolerate a single unkind glance or gossip behind her back. Anyone who shows her disrespect will be fired immediately, starting with you, Davis. One more display of your hostility, and you will leave this house where you have served for 30 years. Have I made myself clear? Mrs. Davis's face froze into a stone mask, reflecting shock and rage. Realizing her defeat, she felt that this young girl had not only escaped punishment, but had somehow, incredibly, come out on top. Yes, sir, she whispered, clenching her teeth. Everything will be done. As she left the office, she left behind a look that could have reduced the door to ashes. She had no intention of giving up. If her master had gone mad, it was her duty to bring him back to his senses. And she knew exactly where to start. Her own investigation to find out the real truth about this scoundrel. Amelia's move to the guest bedroom was like being plunged into a surreal dream. The room was enormous, many times larger than her former apartment. A huge four-poster bed, luxurious silk wallpaper, a bathroom the size of her old kitchen, and a balcony overlooking an endless, immaculately manicured garden. It all created an impression of incredible luxury. Her small suitcase, delivered by a silent valet, seemed pitiful and lonely in all this splendor. In the evening, for the first time in a long time, Amelia took a hot bubble bath. Hot, lying in the warm water, she tried to figure out what had really happened. Victory? Or had she fallen into an even more cunning trap? The answer remained a mystery to her, but when she put her hand on her stomach, she felt a slight push, as if the baby was supporting her, and then she realized she had made the right decision. She had not stayed for herself, but for him. She would give him the opportunity for a better life, but she would not allow this blessing to consume her entirely. She would work hard, she would be independent, she would live by her own rules. Even in this strange, cold, but now hopeful world. In the first days of her new life, Amelia was enveloped in an unusual, almost ringing silence. She woke up in a spacious bed, and the morning sun streamed into her room through the panoramic windows. The only sound breaking the silence was a delicate knock on the door. The young maid Lucy was bringing her breakfast on a silver tray. Unlike the other servants, Lucy did not look at Amelia with fear or restrained contempt. Her eyes showed only sincere human curiosity. "Good morning, Miss Amelia," she said, placing the tray neatly on the table by the window. "Mr. Hughes asks me to tell you that Dr. Evans will be visiting at 2 o'clock. "Thank you, Lucy," Amelia replied, still getting used to this new form of address. "By the way, how are the others?" Lucy looked away for a moment, embarrassed. "Everything is fine, miss. It's just, everyone is a little shocked. Yesterday, Mrs. Davis announced Mr. Hughes's orders at the meeting. No changes. She strictly forbade any discussion of you. But they're still talking about it, aren't they?" Amelia asked with a sad smile. "A little," Lucy admitted honestly. "But it's mostly because of Mrs. Davis herself. She's very strict and unpleasant. Be careful with her, Miss Amelia. She's been here for many years and has come to think of this house as her own, so she doesn't accept any changes." This conversation only strengthened Amelia's resolve. She had no intention of staying in her gilded cage. After breakfast, she headed to her new workplace, the library. It was a spacious, two-story building with high walls and shelves that stretched into the semi-darkness. The air was filled with old, dusty, and slightly musty smells. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, of books were arranged in a chaotic order on the shelves. The work here could take months, maybe even years. But Amelia was not daunted by the prospect. On the contrary, the chaos gave her a sense of purpose. Finding a stepladder and some rags, she started at the top corner, determined not only to organize the books, but to completely tidy up the space. She wanted light and air to reign here once again. Steve watched her from a distance. He passed by the library several times, pretending to be busy, and each time he saw her on the stepladder, dressed in a simple dress, her hair pulled back in a bun. She worked with remarkable method and concentration. There was something fascinating about her every movement, carefully dusting each book, peeking inside, then sorting them onto a separate table according to a principle that was incomprehensible but clear to her. He was used to people working for him for money, out of fear, or for career ambitions. But she worked of her own free will, because it was a condition of her deal with her own conscience. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davis did not remain idle. Her humiliation in her employer's office only intensified her anger. Closing the door of her small but immaculately tidy room, she made a phone call. She contacted her nephew, a former police officer who now worked as a private investigator. "Frank, it's Aunt Eleanor," she said into the phone, using her most friendly tone. "How's your wife? How are the kids?" After a few minutes of polite small talk, she got down to business. "Frank, I need your help. The situation is very complicated. A young woman named Amelia White has appeared at our house. She is pregnant and has somehow gained the trust of Mr. Hughes, who is completely under her influence. I fear she's deceiving him, seeking to gain control of his fortune. We need to get to the bottom of this. I beg you to find out everything. Her past, her connections, all the details. It is especially important to find the child's father, Mark, whose surname I do not know. He abandoned her. Perhaps he will tell us something that will be useful to us. Perhaps you can do this?" However, this will of course require payment. Of course, Aunt Eleanor, came the clear voice on the other end of the line. Anything for you, no question. Consider it done. I need his name, approximate age, and last place of employment. Give me all the information you have. You'll have a full report in a week. Hanging up the phone, Mrs. Davis felt a sense of satisfaction. She was convinced that with Amelia's past, she would surely find some dirt on her, and when she presented it to Mr. Hughes, he would finally see who was truly loyal to him and his home. That evening, Steve went into the library. Amelia was sitting at a large table surrounded by piles of books, diligently copying something into a thick notebook. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice him right away. "Am I disturbing you?" he asked, stopping a few steps away from her. She flinched and looked up. "Mr. Hughes, no, I'm about to finish for today." "I wasn't trying to supervise you," he said, approaching her. He glanced at her notes. She had already made a plan for organizing the books, dividing them into categories. Fiction, history, science. "Amazing, you've settled in quickly. It's just that no one's tidied up here in a long time," she replied. "My mother loved this place," he said, glancing at the full bookshelves. "She could sit here for hours, but after she passed away, I hardly ever came here. There were too many memories here." He picked up one of the books from her desk, a collection of poems. Poetry was her passion, he thought, but my father considered it a useless pursuit, claiming that rhymes couldn't make a living. "My mother was also a fan of poetry," Amelia said softly. "She believed that poetry was the music of the soul." A pause hung between them. The awkward silence gradually dissolved, becoming less tense. "Doctor, Evans is pleased," Steve remarked, changing the subject. "He says you and the baby are doing great. He's prescribed some vitamins and plenty of rest. Don't overdo it." "I don't get tired," she replied. "I enjoy doing this. It keeps me from thinking about other things." He understood what she meant. "Amelia, I wanted to clarify something. Are you sure you don't want me to?" "No," she replied firmly, realizing what he was about to suggest. "Finding Mark. That chapter of my life is over. I don't want to know anything about him anymore. My child will have only one parent, and I will do everything to ensure that he doesn't need anything else." He was struck again by her determination. He was familiar with women who became attached to men, to their money, to their status. Amelia was completely different. He nodded and said, "Okay, I understand." He was about to leave, but stopped at the door. "By the way, I made sure they brought comfortable chairs and a bright floor lamp to the library. You can't ruin your eyesight in a poorly lit room, and also, the chef asked if you had any requests for meals. He's willing to prepare something special for you." Amelia looked at him in surprise. It wasn't cold, calculated concern, like the 6 zeros on a check, but tender, sincere care, and it embarrassed her more than his initial hostility. "Thank you," she replied quietly, "but don't worry about it. I'm not picky." He just nodded, and his figure disappeared behind the door. Amelia remained in the silence of the huge library for a long time, lost in thought. Suddenly it became clear to her that her conflict with this man might be over, but in its place arose a new reality, more confusing and unpredictable, for which she was completely unprepared. A week flew by, and a fragile, unnatural order settled in the estate. Fearing dismissal, the servants became overly polite to Amelia, but their politeness was lifeless and distant. They seemed afraid to hurt her, avoiding her like fragile glass. Amelia's only consolation was the young maid Lucy, with whom she could have a real conversation. Amelia found solace in her work, immersing herself in the library where she found refuge. Leafing through old, dusty volumes, she felt order being established not only on the bookshelves but also in her heart. In this activity, she found a deep, meditative calm. Steve was also going through some internal changes. He canceled several large, aggressive merger deals, which puzzled the members of the board of directors. His life became more measured. He was home more often and traveled less on business. Instead of spending his evenings studying stock reports, he spent them in the library, where he chose a comfortable chair from among the new ones ordered for himself. Sometimes he and Amelia would exchange a few words about the books they had read or the weather. These quick, superficial conversations were a new experience for both of them, a step into uncharted territory. One evening, as Amelia was about to leave, Steve called her. "Amelia, stay a moment, please." She froze, her heart sinking with anxiety. She still instinctively expected some kind of trick from him. "There's something I wanted to show you," he said, and headed for one of the farthest, dustiest sections. Pressing an inconspicuous protrusion in the wall, he caused a section of the bookcase to slide smoothly away, revealing a secret door. Amelia cried out, "What is this?" "This is my father's study," Steve announced. "After he passed away, I locked it up and never set foot in here again. But, on second thought, I decided, maybe you'll find something suitable for your cataloging." Inside are his personal archives and records. He opened the door and invited her to enter. The room was small and paneled in dark wood. The air was thick with the smell of cigars and mothballs. Rows of cabinets with folders lined the walls, and a massive desk stood in the center. This room, resembling a tomb, seemed to hold the secrets and plans of the man who had once owned this house. I don't think I have the right to be here," Amelia whispered. "You have more right than anyone else," Steve said quietly. "Maybe you'll find answers to some questions here, or maybe I'll find out something too." He left her alone. Amelia, her heart pounding, approached the desk. Her hand slid across the smooth, cold surface. She had no specific goal in mind. She just started opening the drawers one by one. They contained old contracts, business correspondence, financial documents, and then, in the bottom drawer, she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a small folder with a single inscription, Question K. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside were photocopies of letters written in a delicate, youthful hand, filled with love, hopes, and dreams for the future. Letters addressed to a girl named Catherine, from a young man named Stephen Hughes, and underneath them were reports from a private detective, detailing all the steps taken to ensure that these letters never reached their intended recipient, and that Catherine would believe she had been forgotten. Amelia sat in an old armchair and watched the world float before her eyes. The story unfolding before her was not her own, but it was strikingly similar. It spoke of devoted love and a life broken by a merciless blow of fate. At that moment, Amelia realized that Steve's cynicism and distrust were not just a character trait, but the result of a deep wound inflicted by his own father. At that moment, Mrs. Davis finally received the long-awaited call from her nephew. "Well, Frank, did you find anything?" she asked, her voice almost trembling with impatience. "Yes, Aunt Eleanor, and it's incredible," Frank said smugly. "I tracked down your Mark, and he turned out to be very talkative once I showed him a couple of $100. Anyway, listen. He really did leave our Amelia, but not without reason. It turns out he had huge gambling debts, and before he disappeared, a large transfer was made to his account, $50,000, and it came from an anonymous foreign fund. An offshore fund?" Mrs. Davis's heart began to race. "Is there any way to find out who it belongs to?" "No, that's out of the question. Practically impossible. But I dug deeper, and you know what I found? One of the funds, similar to the one we discussed, is regularly used by the Hughes Corporation to carry out, let's say, unofficial transactions. There is no direct confirmation, but the coincidence is quite telling. Obviously, someone influential simply paid this Mark to keep him out of sight and out of the way." Everything became clear to Mrs. Davis. Stephen had been interested in this girl from the very beginning. He removed her fiancé from her path and then staged this spectacle with the suitcase to bind her to him once and for all, presenting himself as her protector. It was all so obvious. "Thank you, Frank. You've done me a great service," she replied, her voice steely. "Send me all the documents you have. Bank statements, everything. I won't begrudge you a generous reward." She hung up the phone, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. Now she had a weapon in her hands, and she knew exactly how to use it. Steve would not be her target. She would strike at the most vulnerable spot. Amelia. On the day Steve left for an urgent meeting in the city, Mrs. Davis seized the moment. She knew Amelia would be in the library. With the folder Frank had delivered the day before, she entered the room silently. Amelia, sitting at the table sorting through old letters from Steve's father's archive, felt wary at the sight of the housekeeper. "Mrs. Davis, how can I help you?" she asked politely, but without warmth in her voice. "Oh yes, Miss Amelia, I think I can," the housekeeper said with a sickly sweetness in her voice. She approached the desk and, tossing the folder onto it, added, I think you'll be interested in this. It concerns your former fiancé, Mark." Amelia froze. Just hearing that name caused her excruciating pain. She looked at the folder apprehensively. "What's in here?" "It's proof," Mrs. Davis declared solemnly. "Proof of his true nature, Mr. Hughes, and you were naive to believe in his false virtue." She opened the folder and saw a photograph of Mark leaving some kind of establishment, and underneath it was a bank statement. Mrs. Davis pointed to it and said, "Look, $50,000, transferred to his account a week before he disappeared, and where, oddly enough, did this money come from? From an offshore fund, which, as we all know, our boss often uses for his shady deals." Amelia stared at the numbers and felt as if the ground was falling away beneath her feet. $50,000. Enough to buy anything and anyone, according to Mark. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Yes, you do," cried Mrs. Davis, her voice trembling with anger. "Your benefactor, Stephen Hughes, simply bought your fiancé. He paid him to disappear, leaving you alone, pregnant, and defenseless. And then, to make it all look noble, he staged this scene with the suitcase, pretending to be your protector. He planned it all in advance. He wanted you, and by getting rid of the only obstacle, he got what he wanted. And you, naive girl, believed his lies. Every word the housekeeper uttered cut like a razor. It was all too logical, too plausible. A man capable of such a deed as planning a suitcase with $1 million to test his maid could have done this too. Their entire history together, the delicate thread of trust she had woven with Steve, was severed in an instant. She had been deceived again. Everyone had been deceived. The man she loved and the man she had just begun to trust. "Go away," Amelia whispered, without looking up from her work. "What, does the truth hurt?" Mrs. Davis asked mockingly. "Get out," Amelia cried, jumping to her feet. She knocked the folder off the table, and the sheets of paper scattered across the floor. "Leave my library immediately." Suddenly, Steve appeared in the doorway. He had returned earlier than planned. He saw Amelia, pale and trembling, Mrs. Davis looking satisfied, and sheets of paper scattered across the floor. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice betraying a dangerous calm. "Nothing, sir," Mrs. Davis hastened to reply, trying to pick up the scattered sheets. "We were just discussing some matters with Miss Amelia." "Don't touch that," Amelia exclaimed, her voice trembling with tears and anger. She picked up the bank statement from the floor and, handing it to Steve, asked, "Is this true? Did you do this?" Steve took the document, his eyes skimming over the numbers and the name of the offshore fund, and his expression froze. Everything fell into place. He looked at Mrs. Davis with such obvious understanding that she recoiled in fear. "You paid him to leave me?" Amelia exclaimed, her voice trembling with despair. "You bought him like a thing, and then you came to me with your fake concern. Tell me the truth." "Amelia, it's not what you think," he began. "I'm not to blame for this. I swear to you." "Just like Mark swore he loved me," she exclaimed. "I believed him. I'm a fool for believing him again. You're all the same. You think that money can buy everything: love, silence, someone else's destiny." She could no longer bear to stay in that house. Her eyes darted toward the exit, and she rushed out. "Amelia, stay!" he cried, but his words went unanswered, for she could no longer hear him. Running away from the library, from this house that had seemed like salvation for a moment but turned out to be a new trap, she rushed through the garden, paying no attention to the road. Tears choked her, and suddenly a sharp pain pierced her, forcing her to her knees. Screaming, she looked down and saw a dark stain on her light-colored dress that was spreading uncontrollably. "Steve!" she cried, her scream a mixture of pain, fear, and desperate last hope. He was already close. He picked her up, paying no attention to the dirt or blood. His face was filled with horror. "Davis!" His loud voice echoed throughout the estate. "A car! Immediately to the clinic!" He carried her through the garden, and his whole world, his focus, his entire reality, contracted to this delicate life he held in his arms. He felt the fear of losing her again, and this time he was the only one to blame. They were met with commotion and bright lights. Steve, carrying Amelia in his arms, made his way through the corridors, pushing nurses aside and ignoring their surprised faces. In the reception room, his name was called, and as if by magic, the best doctors appeared. Amelia was immediately taken to the operating room, leaving Steve alone in the sterile, empty corridor. Time dragged on endlessly. He sat on a cold, hard chair, his gaze fixed on a single point. His whole life flashed before his eyes, his young love, his father's betrayal, years of loneliness, and then the appearance of Amelia, so fragile and proud. For the first time, he felt a strong need to pray, and he prayed, swearing everything he had that they would both survive. Finally, the operating room door swung open, and Dr. Evans emerged, an elderly doctor with a weary face. "Mr. Hughes," he said, removing his mask, "you arrived just in time. A little longer and we would have had to retreat without saving anyone." Steve jumped up. Are they alive?" "Both are alive," the doctor confirmed. "You have a baby girl. She's tiny, but perfectly healthy. 7 months. The delivery was difficult for Amelia, but she's strong and is now sleeping under the influence of medication. You can meet your daughter." Steve was taken to the ward where the newborn was. Behind the glass, in a small incubator, lay a tiny human being. Looking at him, all his luxury, all his power, seemed insignificant compared to this small, vulnerable creature. He stood silently, unable to hold back his tears. When she opened her eyes, Amelia saw Steve's face first. He was sitting next to her bed, holding her hand tightly. "Where is she?" Amelia whispered. "My little one?" "She's fine," Steve said calmly. "Our daughter is perfectly healthy. She's waiting for you." He accompanied her to a wheelchair and took her to her daughter's room. Looking at her baby through the glass, Amelia felt a surge of love and tenderness that split her heart. "I want to name her Hope," she said softly. Steve nodded, and tears glistened in his eyes again. "That's a wonderful name," he whispered. The silence lingered, filled with some incredible power. All the pain, all the anger, all the resentment seemed to melt away in the face of the miracle of new life. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you," Amelia finally said, not taking her eyes off her daughter. "The events of the last few days have shaken me too much." "I know," he said, "but I wasn't involved in this with Mark. I swear it wasn't me. I'll find out who's to blame. I'll prove to you that I didn't lie. Just give me some time." Amelia remained silent but did not leave. Upon returning to the estate, Steve immediately fired Mrs. Davis. He acted decisively and ruthlessly, writing her a check and giving her only an hour to pack. Her attempts to justify herself were useless. He did not want to listen to her. Steve then contacted a lawyer and ordered him to use all available means to track the payment. 2 days later, the truth came out, and it was far more disgusting than he could have imagined. The payment had been made from a fund linked to his corporation. However, it was an old, dormant fund created by his father for his secret affairs. The only other person with signing authority besides Steve himself was Mrs. Davis, whom Steve's father trusted unconditionally. And it was she, the deceived and humiliated servant, who decided to take revenge by destroying everything she could. Steve brought all the documents to the hospital and, without saying a word, laid them in front of Amelia. She read them carefully, and tears ran down her face again. But this time, they were tears of joy and relief. He was telling the truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "Forgive me for creating a world where this was possible." 5 years flew by unnoticed. The sound of children's laughter rang out in the huge garden of the Hughes estate. A little girl with black curls and sparkling eyes chased a golden retriever across the lawn. It was Hope, and her mother Amelia sat on the terrace in a comfortable chair, watching her daughter with tenderness. She had left behind the difficult years when she was just a downtrodden servant. Now Amelia was a university graduate with a degree in landscape design and ran a charitable foundation set up by Steve. The foundation provided support to young single mothers facing difficulties in life. Steve came out of the house, the harshness and coldness of his face worn away by time. His gaze was peaceful and full of happiness. "Grandpa!" little Hope cried out, and without hesitation ran to him. He picked her up and spun her around, and their joyful laughter echoed throughout the garden. Amelia watched them, her heart filling with peace. Their journey together had not been easy, accompanied by disagreements, tears, and long silent evenings. But step by step, day by day, they had built their family. She had never called him father. To her, he would always be Steve, her friend, her support, a part of her life, and the most wonderful grandfather to her daughter. She picked up her laptop from the table and launched a new project. It was the design for a large public park in her hometown, a park she had been building from the ground up with her own funds. Now she was no longer a hostage to circumstances. She was creating worlds herself. And in the world she was building, there was no place for deception and shame, only for beauty, faith in the best, and quiet, well-deserved happiness.